Good day everyone, we are the Group 5 from the class of AENG 327 Section 4 and we will discuss the Chapter 9 of FAA Helicopter Flying Handbook which focuses on basic flight maneuvers. Next slide please. The contents of our discussion will be first, introduction, second, the 4 fundamentals, third, straight and level flight, fourth, turns, fifth, normal climb, sixth, normal descent, seventh, vertical takeoff to a hover, eighth, hovering, 9. Hovering turn, 10. Hovering forward flight, 11. Hovering sideward flight, 12. Hovering rearward flight, and last is taxiing. Next slide please. And for our first reporter, we have Mr. Cedeño.
So for the basic introduction, the differences in techniques for helicopter maneuvers are noted, such as adjusting pedal pressure based on rotor system rotation, while terminologies like proper pedal pressure is commonly used. There's no distinction between helicopters with or without governors when discussing throttle coordination for RPM maintenance. Instead of using terms like collective pitch control and collective pitch control, they are simply referred to as collective and cyclic throughout the chapter. Due to helicopter performance variations with weather and loading, specific nose attitudes and power settings aren't detailed. Moreover, not every attitude or move for maneuvers is covered, and each maneuver includes a brief description, technique, and common errors to watch for. So next slide. So for the four fundamentals, a brief introduction about this is the foundation of all flight maneuvers rests on four fundamentals, which is the straight and level flight, turns, climbs, and descents. Proficiencies in these basics guided by intuitive control analysis rather than mechanical movements forms the bedrock of effective maneuver execution. With a clear mental image of each maneuver, students can excel if they grasp these fundamentals well. Flight instructors play a pivot, pivotal role in imparting this knowledge and integrating practice to ensure instinctive mastery. Neglecting these basics can hinder progress, with most student difficulties stemming from insufficient training, practice, or understanding of these fundamentals. Thus, emphasizing their importance is crucial for successful flight training. So during maneuvering flight, it's crucial to maintain control by moving the cyclic only as fast as trim, torque, and rotor speed allow, ensuring pilot and aircraft limitations aren't exceeded. Anticipating changes in aircraft performance due to loading or environmental conditions is the key, as well as being aware of flight characteristics like torque variations during turns and cyclic applications. Factors like wind, engine failures, and crew coordination are vital considerations, especially in steep turns where maintaining altitudes requires requires trading airspeed. Normal landings and hovering demand careful cyclic positioning relative to the horizon for precise control. Next slide.
Now, for the next slide, we have the first fundamental of flight based on the maneuver. First is straight and level flight. We can define straight and level flight as a flight in which altitude is constant, heading is maintained. The airspeed can be determined by the attitude of the rotor disc relative to the horizon, and the horizontal stabilizer determines the helicopter's attitude when stabilized at an airspeed and altitude. Next slide, please. Now, what are the techniques to maintain the straight and level flight? To maintain forward flight, the rotor tip butt plane must be tilted forward. It causes the nose of the helicopter to lower, which in turn would cause the airspeed to increase. In straight and level flight, in, uh, When we increase the collective, it causes the helicopter to climb. When we decrease the collective, it causes the helicopter to descend. Now, for technique, to increase airspeed in straight level flight, we apply forward pressure to cyclic and raise the collective as necessary to maintain altitude. Uh, to When we decrease the airspeed, we apply rearward pressure on the cyclic and it lowers the collective and it maintains the altitude. Next slide, please. Now, for the common errors of straight and level flight, first is failure to trim the helicopter properly, tending to hold anti-torque pedal pressure and opposite cycling. This is commonly called cross control. Next is failure to maintain desired airspeed. Third, failure to hold proper control position to maintain desired ground track. And lastly, failure to allow helicopter to stabilize at mean airspeed. Next slide, please. And for the next fundamental, we have turn. Next slide, please. We can define turn as a maneuver used to change the heading of the helicopter. Now, the technique for the turn. To enter a turn from a straight and level flight, apply sideward pressure on the cyclic in the direction the turn is to be made. This is the only control movement needed to start the turn. Note that do not use the pedals to assist the turn. Use pedals only to compensate for torque to keep the helicopter in trim around the vertical axis. Next is trim is indicated by a yaw string in the center. We can see in the picture at the side of the presentation. Or we can also yaw string is also known as the center bolt on a turn and slip indicator. A yaw string, also referred to as a slip string. It is a tool used to indicate slip or skid during flight. It is simply a string attached to the nose or canopy of an aircraft so that it is visible to the pilot during flight. The string measures side slip and offers a visual cue to the pilot in order to make yaw corrections. Next slide, please. Now, what is a slip and skid? First, let's define skid. It occurs when the helicopter slides sideways towards the center of the turn. It is caused by an insufficient amount of anti-torque pedal in the direction of the turn, or too much in the direction of opposite the turn in relation to the amount of power used. Next is skid. It is caused by too much anti-torque pedal pressure in the direction of the turn, or by too little in the direction opposite the turn in relation to the amount of power used. If the helicopter is forced to turn faster with increased pedal pressure, instead of by increasing the degree of the back, it skids sideways away from the center of the turn instead of flying it in its normal curved path. Next slide, please. Now, here are the common errors of a turn. First is failure to maintain proper power and airspeed. Second, holding too much or too little anti-torque pedal. Next, lastly, we have in the level of decreasing power before adjusting the nose pulsing attitude. Next slide.
So for the next topic, we will discuss on how helicopters normally climb. So in this section of this discussion, let us take note that we will discuss the normal climb of helicopter from level flight only. So for the techniques, first, climb while maintaining airspeed, increase the collective and throttle, and adjusting the pedals as necessary to maintain a centered ball in the slip or skid indicator. And then apply slight aft of cyclic movement to maintain airspeed and direct all power into it. The helicopter can climb with the nose down and descend with a nose up. So helicopter attitude changes through acceleration or deceleration, not decline or descent. So we must take note of that. Also, when the climb altitude is approximately the same as the level flight in the stable climb, then the depending it also depends on the aircraft's horizontal stabilizer design. So for the next scenario, if the pilot wishes to climb faster with a decreased airspeed, then the climb can be initiated with up cycling. Depending on initial or entry airspeed of the climb can be accomplished without increasing the collective pitch. However, as the airspeed decreases, we must take note that the airflow over the vertical fin of the helicopter decreases, necessitating more anti-torque or left pedal application to satisfy the rotation of the body of the helicopter. Next slide is, so now that we all know on how to on how helicopter climb from level flight, we must discuss on the technique on how the helicopter starts from climb to level of the helicopter into its cruising level. So to level off from a climb, start adjusting the attitude to the level flight altitude a few feet prior to reaching the desired altitude. The amount of lead depends on the rate of climb at the time of level off. The higher the rate of climb, the more the lead. So what is lead? Lead is like an advanced command of the pilot to the helicopter, since the control that the collective pitch or the cyclic pitch that the pilot apply to the helicopter has delayed effects that will delay the level flight that the pilot the helicopter must reach. So let's take for an example here, wherein if the climb rate is 500 feet per minute, you should lead the level of 550 feet. So to begin the level of, apply forward cyclic to adjust and maintain a level flight altitude. So maintain climb power until the airspeed approaches the desired cruising speed. Then lower the collective to obtain cruising power and adjust the throttle to obtain and maintain cruising RPM. Throughout the level off, maintain longitudinal trim with the anti-torque pedals. So for the common errors from the normal climb, so number one is the failure to maintain proper power and airspeed, holding too much. Next one is the holding too much or too little anti-torque pedal. And lastly, in the level off, decreasing power before adjusting the nose to cruising attitude. So next topic is the normal descent. So normal descent is when the helicopter is it is a maneuver, it's a type of maneuver of the helicopter from the level flight to a decided or desired altitude where the pilot control the rate of descent of the helicopter. So for the technique of this maneuver, first scenario is to descend while maintaining airspeed. To establish a normal descent from straight and level flight at cruising airspeed, lower the collective or decrease the collective and throttle, and while increase pressure in anti-torque pedal. So next one is to apply ample cyclic pressure to maintain airspeed while descending. If the pilot wants to decelerate while While descending, the cyclic must move aft. If the pilot desired to descend with increased airspeed, then applied forward cyclic. As the helicopter stabilizes at any forward airspeed, the fuselage attitude will streamline due to the airflow over the horizontal stabilizer. As the airspeed changes, the airflow over the vertical stabilizer or fin changes, so the pedal must be adjusted for trim. So next, the pilot should always remember that the total lift and thrust vectoring is controlled by the cyclic. If a certain airspeed is desired, it will require a certain amount of cyclic and collective movement for level flight. So if the cyclic is moved, then the thrust versus lift ratio is changed. Up cyclic directs more power to lift and altitude increases, while forward cyclic directs more power to thrust and airspeed increases. If the collective is not changed, change only in cyclic, the total thrust to lift ratio is does not change. Aft cyclic results in a climb, and forward cyclic results in a descent with the corresponding airspeed changes. So to level off the descent of a helicopter, the lead the desired altitude by approximately 10% of the rate of descent. For example, a 500 feet per minute rate of descent would require a 50-foot lead. So next one is at this point, increase the collective to obtain cruising power. Adjust the throttle to maintain RPM and increase left anti-torque pedal pressure to maintain heading. While for the clockwise rotor system, we will use the right pedal pressure. To adjust we must adjust the cyclic to obtain cruising airspeed also and a level flight attitude rather, as the desired attitude is reached. So here are the common errors while normal descent of a helicopter. So first one is the failure to maintain constant angle of descent during training. The second one is the failure to level off the aircraft sufficiently, which results in recovery below the desired altitude. And lastly, failure to adjust anti-torque pedal pressures for changes in power. So next is
So the seventh is the vertical takeoff to hover. This maneuver involves lifting the helicopter from the ground to a height of 2 to 3 feet while maintaining a constant heading. The helicopter should remain nearly motionless over a reference point at a constant altitude and heading. Next slide, please. So for the technique is the pilot clears the area and obtains takeoff clearance. The pilot uses the pedals for heading control, the collective for hover height control, and the cyclic for position control. The maneuver begins with the collective down and the cyclic neutral or slightly into the wind. The collective is slowly increased until the helicopter becomes light on skids. As the helicopter lifts off, the pilot checks for proper attitude control response and center of gravity. Once the desired over altitude is reached, the pilot adjusts the control to maintain position. Next slide, please. So for the common errors is the first is not ascending vertically as the helicopter becomes airborne. Second is pulling excessive collective, causing the helicopter to gain too much altitude. Third is over-controlling the anti-torque pedals, which changes the heading and RPM of the helicopter. Fourth is rapid throttle reduction, reducing throttle rapidly when the proper RPM has been exceeded. Can lead to exaggerated heading changes and loss of lift, resulting in a loss of altitude. And the fifth is failure to ascend slowly. Ascending too quickly can lead to control issues and potential safety risks. It's important to ascend slowly and steadily. Next slide, please.
Now we have hovering. Next slide, please. We can define helicopter hovering when a helicopter maintains a stable position in the air without moving. It is achieved by adjusting rotor blades to generate lift, counteracting gravity and other outside forces. Hovering requires careful coordination and control inputs from the pilot to maintain stability and position. Helicopters hover for various reasons, including takeoff and landing, performing precise maneuvers, or conducting tasks such as aerial filming, rescue operations, or surveying. Next slide, please. Now, these are the necessary decisions, adjustments, or techniques that must be observed for us to achieve a proper hover. First, we have maintaining hover. To stabilize the helicopter over a point, pilots rely on sight and peripheral vision to detect subtle changes in attitude and altitude, allowing for anticipatory adjustments. Second, we have visual focus. So rather than fixating solely below, pilots are advised to maintain a broader visual perspective for better altitude and positional awareness. Third, we have control inputs. Altitude is controlled with the collective, throttle maintains RPM, cyclic adjusts position, and pedals controls heading. Next slide, please. So for the fourth, we have smooth corrections, wherein small, coordinated adjustments are crucial to preventing overcorrection and maintaining stability after achieving the desired correction. And lastly, we have developing feel. So this is an experience fosters a pilot's intuitive understanding of the helicopter, enabling them to detect and respond to deviations before significant movement occurs, resulting in natural control. Next slide, please. After discussing the techniques, now we have the common errors pilots encounter when hovering. So first, we have the delayed responses and sluggish reactions to the helicopter's movement. Second, we have neglecting to account for the delay in adjusting cyclic and collective pitch, leading to excessive control inputs. So this is common for students due to anticipate the helicopter's movements. But due to its inertia, there's a brief period before it responds. And lastly, misinterpreting changes in the helicopter's orientation as changes in altitude, resulting in incorrect manipulation of the controls. Next slide, please. Next slide. So under hovering, we have hovering turn. Next slide, please. So a hovering turn is performed at a fixed altitude, rotating the helicopter's nose left or right while maintaining position over a reference point. It can also revolve around the helicopter's mast or tail. This maneuver requires precise control of all flight controls, especially near the ground. Next slide, please. Now for the technique. So during helicopter turns, initiate by applying anti-torque pedal pressure toward the desired direction. So with more power needed for left turns, due to increased tail rotor or pitch angle, adjust cyclic control as necessary to maintain position over the intended spot. Increasing pedal pressure as the turn progresses into the crosswind position, compensating for wind resistance. Additionally, managing collective and throttle for constant altitude and rotor RPM. So this reduces pedal pressure slightly after the 90-degree portion of the turn. Next slide, please. So in continuation, anticipating opposite pedal pressure as the tail transitions from upwind to downwind during the 180-degree segment, applying rearward cyclic pressure to counteract the helicopter's tendency to weather vane in a tailwind. Continuous adjustments in pedal pressure and cyclic deflection are crucial throughout the turn. In high wind conditions, initiate a turn to the left first for sufficient tail rotor thrust before attempting a right turn. Lastly, avoiding hovering turns in strong winds, limiting after cyclic controls, following manufacturer recommendations in the flight manual. Next slide, please. So before giving a visual representation of the technique of a hovering turn, let's familiarize ourselves with these three controls. So as mentioned, we have the anti-torque pedals, which controls the yaw by adjusting tail rotor pitch to counteract rotor torque. Next, we have the throttle, which regulates engine power and rotor RPM to control lift. And lastly, we have the collective, which adjusts the pitch angle of all rotor blades simultaneously to control altitude. Next slide, please. Okay. So as we can see, we have different types of cyclic directions. We have forward, right, rearward, left, and forward. And with this, we have specific techniques we have to apply for a specific cyclic turn. So for example, if we have a forward cyclic, for the pedal, there must be more left to start to turn on the left. So on the other hand, for a right cyclic turn, our pedal should have more left pressure in the turn and so on. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have the common errors. So for the first common error, failing to maintain a slow constant rate of turn. Second, failing to maintain position over the reference point. Third, failing to maintain RPM with. Fourth, failing to maintain altitude. And lastly, failing to use pedals properly.
Next slide. So, for hovering forward flight, it is normally used to move a helicopter to a specific location, and it may begin from a stationary hover. So during the maneuver, constant ground speed, altitude, and heading should be maintained. So for the technique for hovering forward flight, first is before starting, in order to keep the helicopter on a straight path, it is necessary to use the two references points that are aligned and positioned at a certain distance ahead of the helicopter. So the figure here is, there is a two reference point. So next slide please. So the second one is start the maneuver by exerting forward pressure on the cyclic while maintaining a normal hovering altitude. As the movement of helicopter begins, bring the cyclic back to the neutral position in order to maintain a low ground speed. A low ground speed means it means no faster than a brisk walk. So to stop the forward motion, exert backward pressure on the cyclic until the helicopter comes to stop. Then bring the cyclic back to its neutral position to avoid any backward movement. So there's another way to stop the helicopter from moving forward. So just level it with the rearward pressure and let it drift to a stop. So on the right side of this slide are the common errors for hovering forward flight. So the first one is exaggerated movement of the cyclic, which causes irregular surface movement. The second one is failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control, and it can result in excessive heading change. The third common error is failure to maintain desired hovering height. The fourth one is failure to maintain proper RPM. And the last one is failure to maintain alignment with direction of travel. Next slide, please. So for the hovering sideward flight, next slide, please. It is a movement when a helicopter moves laterally to the left or right while staying in the air in a stationary position. So, sideways hovering flight may be required to relocate the helicopter to a designated region when circumstances prevent the use of forward flight. So, same to forward flight, throughout the maneuver, it is essential or it is important to maintain a constant ground speed and altitude as well as the heading. So, next slide please. For the techniques, before starting, ensure that the hover region is unobstructed, particularly in the area of the tail rotor. So to hover sideward effectively, it is crucial to create a minimum of two reference points, as seen on the figure on the right side of this PowerPoint. So these reference points aid in maintaining a straight path over the ground while ensuring a consistent direction. So to begin the maneuver from a normal hovering height, applying cyclic toward the side in which the movement is desired. Again, as the movement begins, return the cyclic back to its neutral position to maintain the low ground speed. To counteract the lateral movement, exert cyclic pressure in the opposite direction and maintain it until the helicopter comes to a stop. So when the motion is stopped, reposition the cyclic back to its neutral position in order to avoid movement in other directions. So next slide please. For the common errors on sideward hovering flight, first is exaggerated movement of the cyclic, but this time, this exaggerated movement of the cyclic gives results in over-controlling and erratic movement of over the surface. Second one is failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control, again, resulting in excessive heading change. The third one is failure to maintain desired hovering height. Fourth one is failure to maintain proper RPM. And the last one is failure to make sure the area is clear prior to starting the maneuver. Next slide please. Hovering rearward flight. Next slide please. In rearward hovering, a helicopter performs a movement called hovering to keep a fixed location in the air while flying in reverse direction. So when it is not possible to employ forward or sideward, then rearward hovering flight may be required to relocate the helicopter to a certain place. So prior to initiating the maneuver, it is crucial to ensure that the area behind the helicopter is completely cleared, as the limited view from the helicopter poses a potential risk. It is recommended to utilize ground personnel. So on the right side are the techniques for the rearward flight hovering. The first one is choose two reference point, again just like in the forward hovering flight. So initiate the maneuver by exerting backward force on the cyclic control while maintaining a standard hovering altitude. Once the movement has commenced, adjust the cyclic so it maintains a slower ground speed. To halt this backward motion, use the forward cyclic input and maintain it until the helicopter comes to a complete stop. So once the motion comes to stop, reposition the cyclic to the neutral position. Similarly, in the context of forward and sideward hovering flight, use opposite cyclic input can be employed to stabilize the helicopter and allow it to come to a stop. It is necessary to ensure that there is sufficient space between the tail rotor and other components. Next slide, please. Next slide. So for the common errors on rearward hovering, the first one is exaggerated movement of the cyclic, resulting in over-controlling and uneven movement over the surface. Second one is failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control, resulting in excessive heading change, and same as the common errors exist in the sideward hovering flight. Next slide, please.
Next is taxiing. Taxiing refers to the movement of the helicopter on or near the surface of taxiways or other designated areas. Next slide, please. So basically, there are three types of taxi, which is hover taxi, air taxi, surface taxi. Hover taxi is used when operating below 25 feet above ground level. It's similar to forward, sideward, or rearward hovering flight. Second is air taxi. This is preferred when movements require greater distances within an airport or heliport boundary. In this case, the helicopter flies to the new location but is expected to remain below 100 feet AGL with an appropriate airspeed. It also avoids overflight of other aircraft, vehicles, and personnel. Third is surface taxi. This method is used to minimize the effects of rotor downwash in wheel-type helicopters. However, surface taxiing in skid-type helicopters is generally not recommended due to high risk of dynamic rollover. Next slide, please. Next slide. So for the technique for air taxi is, first is preparation. Determine the appropriate airspeed and altitude to avoid the crosshatch or shaded areas of height or velocity diagram. Be aware of crosswind conditions that could lead to loss of tail rotor effectiveness. Choose two reference points directly in front for the desired ground path and keep them aligned throughout the maneuver. Second is start. Begin from a normal hovering height by applying forward pressure on the cyclic. As movement begins, attain the desired airspeed with the cyclic. control the desired altitude with collective and RPM with the throttle. Third is during the maneuver, maintain a desired ground speed and track with the cyclic. A constant heading with anti-torque pedals, the desired altitude with collective and proper operating RPM with the throttle. Last is to stop. Apply aft cyclic pressure to reduce forward speed and simultaneously lower the collective to initiate the descent to over altitude. As forward motion stops, return the cyclic to the neutral position to prevent rearward movement. As you approach the proper hover altitude, increase the collective as necessary to stop descent at hover altitude. Next slide, please. So for the common errors, one is erratic movement of the cyclic. Second is failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control. Third is failure to maintain desired altitude. Fourth is failure to maintain proper RPM, overflying parked aircraft, flying the crosshatch, flying a crosswind that could lead to loss of tail rotor effectiveness, excessive tail low attitudes, excessive power used or required to stop, failure to maintain alignment with direction of travel. Next slide, please. So for the technique for surface taxi, first is the helicopter should be stationary on the surface with the collective fully down and the RPM the same as that used for a hover. This RPM should maintain throughout the maneuver. Second is move the cyclic slightly forward and apply gradual upward pressure on the collective to move the helicopter forward. Next is use the anti-torque pedals to maintain the heading and the cyclic to maintain ground track. Fourth is during a crosswind, hold the cyclic into the wind and wind a sufficient amount to eliminate any drifting movement. Next slide, please. So for the common errors is one is improper use of cyclic. Second is failure to use anti-torque pedals for heading control. Third is improper use of the controls during crosswind operations. And last is failure to maintain proper RPM. Next slide, please.
And that brings us to the end of our discussion. We hope you learned something from us. Thank you and have a nice day.